Chapter 7. Conscious. My parents were greeted by a familiar face. One of the nurses was a friend, Alan's neighbour Monique. She greeted my parents. Hello, she smiled kindly. Don't worry, we'll look after Kevin and I'll try and get him into a side ward. Her words eased some of my parents' concerns and fears, but not all of them. At least they knew I would receive excellent care from someone who knew me. The ward looked like it had been transplanted from a geriatrics unit, and I looked out of place. A child among senior citizens, I lay there once again propped up and gazing blankly ahead. Hello, Kevin, my father spoke quietly, not wanting to disturb the peace of the ward. Me and your mum are here. There was a short pause while my brain processed the words. I looked at Dad and then returned to gazing blankly at nothing. The tea lady came by at that moment and asked if I wanted some tea. Her words sounded like gibberish to me, and I just looked at her. Mum answered for me. Yes, please. Only half a cup. I looked at Mum but said nothing. Dad tried to get me talking, asking me questions about how I'd slept and if I wanted my tea. He knew any answers would take their time in coming. I glanced around and ignored his questions, and I asked, "Where am I?" before starting to cry. Mum just gathered me in her arms to cuddle me and hold me while I wept. At first I pulled away, but then cuddled back down, the safety of the arms calling me. Again I asked where I was, and when Mum told me I was in hospital, I just stared at her, still not really knowing who she was. A new doctor appeared and asked to speak to my parents privately. They walked to one side and the doctor explained that the brain injuries would mean that I was a changed person and would have trouble with my memory. He also explained that he would ask some questions and monitor my responses. Then he returned to my bedside. Good morning, Kevin. How was your night? I gave the doctor the same blank look that I gave everyone else. He tried to explain about the accident to me and explained that I'd injured my brain. I must have understood some of it as I reached my father and sobbed into his arms. The doctor asked me if I knew how old I was and where I was. I responded that I was 15 and in Africa. The doctor noted my responses, thanked me and walked away. Dad tried to explain to me that I was 22 and in London. Then once an hour a nurse would come and ask me the same questions. My replies varied, but my age was always 13 to 15 years old. My location changed too. 1 hour it would be Jamaica, then Spain or China. My dad asked me why I thought I was in different countries, and I pointed to the nurses with different ethnicities and nationalities. I'd been born and raised in Peckham, which is a very multicultural area, a real melting pot of races. There were no Mediterranean-looking nurses on the ward, so the doctors thought my reference in Spain could be a small part of my memory wanting to move there. Alan came to visit me. At first I didn't know who he was, then I remembered him and our friendship. I think this hurt Mum, as I still hadn't really recognised her. She'd read accounts of people with amnesia not knowing their own children or spouses and feared that I would never ever remember her. Looking back, I'm very glad that both Mum and Dad had the support of not only family but friends too. Alan's parents, Steve and Terry, would visit me in hospital, not that I really noticed them much at the time. Terry would spend time with my mum, sharing her fears and worries, as only a mother can. They'd stand outside, talking, smoking, with the ever-present ambulance sirens wailing in the background. Terry had been with Alan as he cried about me, and now she did the same for my mum. Mum had been given worrying statistics by doctors and was scared for my future. Only 40% of people with severe traumatic brain injuries ever return to work, and the majority of them were unable to work full-time. Terry reminded her that I was strong, I was young, which gave me a better chance, and said that Alan would nag me better as he still needed a partner to hit the bars and clubs with. Little things like that made Mum smile. My recovery was slow, and the little things I did were seen as huge steps. I spent most of my time in hospital sitting propped up in bed, not really interacting with the world or people around me. The first time I asked to walk to the toilets rather than have a nurse tend to me in bed was seen as a major breakthrough, especially as I asked Alan to walk me there. After that, I would make my own way there, holding onto the drip stand. I didn't really have one, and head to the wall toilet. I still don't know why, but one night I decided I wanted to use the toilet just at the corridor rather than the one on the ward. I made my way out of the corridor and looked around me. I didn't know where I was or how to get back to bed. I walked to the nurse's station, confused and bleary. I was talking nonsense and crying, jumbling up I needed the toilet with escape routes and being lost. I started crying for my mother. No one with a relative in hospital wants the telephone to ring at 2:45 in the morning. It is invariably a harbinger of bad news. My mum answered the call fearing the worst. The poor nurse on night duty was requested that my parents get to the hospital as soon as possible, as I was crying hysterically for my mother and was refusing to move from the corridor until Mum was there. The other patients may not have appreciated my racket, but for my mum to know that I had asked for her, remembered her, that was her gift. Her baby was back. My parents rushed to the hospital, and when I caught sight of Mum, I actually jumped up to cuddle her. My crying stopped, and Mum took me back to my bed. This was one of the few things I remember from this time in hospital. I remember the safety and warmth of being in her arms, being held close and comfortably back to sleep. Over the next few days, my memory started improving. I remember being in Camberwell and more parts of my life. However, the emotional turmoil caused by the brain injury meant this manifested into tears. I would just sit there crying. This was difficult for my family to deal with, but as the doctors explained to my parents, there were deep gouges along the side of my brain, and as I healed, my brain would have to find new ways to route the neutral impulses that controlled emotions, and I'd be more emotional as the brain rewired itself and could misinterpret emotions. It was a long-winded way of saying that I'd spend a lot of time crying. Even when I wanted to laugh or smile, I'd be crying, but it meant that I was healing. When my parents visited, I wasn't able to greet them, and even better, knew who they were. My mum would get a bit teary. This would set me off, and then Dad's defences would fail, and we'd all hug and hold each other crying. We got through a lot of tissues. When the doctors came in to check on me, I would try to read what was on the back of the medical notes. Mum later said it reminded her of when I was young and would read the back pages of Dad's newspaper. I wouldn't really understand what I was reading, but just enjoyed the action of reading. As my memory continued to improve, I had another MRI scan. It was a routine procedure for me now, even though I was unhappy at leaving my parents behind. This would enable the doctors to see how badly my brain was damaged, hopefully without the previous swelling in the way. While we waited for the results, I sat by the window in the ward looking out of the view. I mentioned that it reminded me of looking out of the window during the business studies classes at school. My parents kept quiet, knowing that allowing me the space and time to access my memories was the best thing they could do. 30 minutes later, my results were ready. One of the doctors arrived, and with him was the same professor who'd been there when I was initially admitted into hospital. I later thought he looked a bit like Sir Isaac Newton, the great mathematician. He greeted my parents and said hello to me. I didn't reply. I was off in my own world again. He explained to my parents that the swelling around the frontal lobes had decreased significantly and that he felt I was now ready to be moved to the Recovery and Rehabilitation Centre. It was just over the road from the hospital and called Mapofa House. I was to be moved there the very next day.